All right, good afternoon, friends. Jay here. So, settling in, and due to this coronavirus outbreak, I took it upon myself to do some videos. Why not? So, while I'm here for the next couple of weeks, quarantined in the house, might as well do some videos to get through this. So, first video I'm going to do is about my top 10 favorite black metal albums. Now, for me personally, I have a preferred style of black metal. I tend to not really like kind of the traditional, more minimalistic sounding black metal. I personally prefer the more symphonic, technical styles of black metal. So the more traditional bands that are like focus more on the atmosphere, it's not like I don't like them, they're just not my preferred style. So with that in mind, you'll get kind of a clear picture of what type of styles I enjoy the most with my top 10. Now there are quite a few ties, so take a careful look at that. Now, to start things off, I have at number 10, and this one's tied. It's with Thonic's Sadiq Bale. This is the Chinese version, I believe, that I got at Maryland Death Fest years back. Now, what I really enjoy about this particular album is that unlike the more recent albums, I feel like this was kind of their last, like kind of black metal focused, especially with the imagery. I remember in 2007 they came to Ozfest, and I remember seeing them, and they had very much kind of that kind of black metal imagery, and they started to kind of lose that over the years, which is okay, but I feel like musically speaking, it had a darker edge. So really enjoyed this album in particular, and I think it's heavier compared to the other albums. The other albums are a little bit more melodic, which is still awesome. I love those albums, but I think this one has the edge and heaviness. So that's shared with Cradle of Filth's Dusk in Her Embrace. Now, I know what some folks may say and think. They may not be big fans of Cradle of Filth, especially in black metal circles, but there's no denying this album in particular, with the atmosphere, the heaviness. I love Principles of Evil Made Flesh, but I think this album is, especially production-wise, there's a little more oomph to it. It's heavy, it's dark. Vocally, it's all over the place. A lot of range in it as far as Danny's singing, and for me in particular, I think it's a pretty incredible album. So, Cradle of Filth, Dusk in Her Embrace. So those are tied for number 10. Now at number 9, we have Scald and Vium with Stride Slysten. I'm terrible at pronunciations, so, and forgive me for not looking up this first. It's in Swedish. So, but Scald and Vium. Now, this particular album was in my, this was number 1 for 2019. This particular album, the only thing I don't like is the fact that it only has 8 songs. I wish there were more, because it is heavy, it's fast, it's currently playing in the background. It's dark, very reminiscent of multiple styles. So the band's from Sweden, and so you kind of expect that from like the Dark Funeral and Ethereal sounding bands. But this particular album kind of fuses a lot. There's a lot of 1349 you'll hear in it. Nordjävel, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong too. They're the Norwegian band. But this band, in this particular album, heavy, fast, dark, definitely a highlight of 2019. Now, moving right along to number 8. This was actually a top album of this was one of my top albums of previous years, and this is Hyperion with Spherical Euphony. Now, this particular album, I personally have described it as an amazing fusion of Emperor's symphonic black metal style with Dissection's melodies. Now, the band is from Sweden, so you can definitely see that. But this particular album, each song has its own uniqueness, and this is just an incredible album. So that's sitting at number 8 as far as my top albums. Now moving along to number 7. Okay, this is going to be Cythereal. Okay, Cythereal with Ekpyrosis. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. I literally listened to it 5 minutes ago, but I just forgot. So, anywho, this is Cythereal with Ekpyrosis. Now, this album, in my humble opinion, is their best. I know a lot of folks prefer the middle material, but to me, that just kind of sounds like Dark Funeral, just blast beats and that type of style. Without a lot of diversity in the tracks. I love Nord. I think that's a great. Their first is fantastic because it blends the atmosphere with it of like previous symphonic bands. But I think their more recent albums that they've come out with are pretty good, are a little bit better. But this album takes the cake. Each song has its uniqueness in it. It's heavy. It's much more technical than their previous albums. I'd say this is clearly the most technical of their albums. The drums are amazing. They're back and forth with the tempos, and it just builds up. A World in Hell is just, that song in itself is just like adrenaline bursting because of the tempo changes here and there. It's just a great all-around album. So it's, in my humble opinion, it's their best. So, but this is going to be Cythereal at number 7. Now, once again, we have another tie, and these two albums at number 6 are definitely going to show my bias towards the Swedish sound, the Swedish black metal style. But this is going to be Nagelfar tied with itself. I couldn't make up my mind. Sheol and Harvest. Each one of these albums is just incredible. Sheol is the album that really got me into the band. And it's just a great album. It's catchy. You know, Black God Aftermath, I Am Vengeance. These are extremely catchy tracks. And the album as a whole is fantastic. It got me into the band. But Harvest, I think, it has a little bit more diversity in the tracks, especially with its, the self-titled song Harvest. The atmosphere in it, it's just an epic track. The Darkest Road, absolutely love that track. The whole album's just really solid. Vocally, I enjoy both vocalists, whether it's Jens Ryden or Chris. I can't even pronounce his name, but Chris, he's the man. We'll just leave it at that, Chris. But he's such a talented vocalist, and a lot of folks forget that he was in Cythereal for a time. So, I mean, he has a lot of experience as a black metal vocalist. So I enjoy both vocalists. I think they're both talented. So that's why I have both of those tied at number 6. Now, moving along. Number 5. I have another tie. Now, this also just so happens to be the final tie of this countdown. But this is another one I couldn't get my mind around and to make a decision, because I love both albums just as much, and so it's hard competition-wise. But interestingly, both bands are from the Netherlands. But we have Slechtvak, The War That Plagues the Land, and we have Kerk Angren with Lamendam, and both of these albums are just fantastic for what they are. As far as Karak Angren, obviously you've seen that I really enjoy the melodic side of black metal, the melody-driven music, and this is, in my humble opinion, their absolute best album. Each song has its own, its own uniqueness. The riffs, the atmosphere of them. Carriage Wheel Murder is just one of my favorite black metal tracks of all time. It's absolutely epic. Fast pace, etc. The tempo and the builds. It's just, this album's absolutely fantastic. And then going into the lyrical content, it goes over the legends, etc., and going over the the mythology of the White Lady that haunts Lamadon, etc. So just really fantastic album, and it was great to see them. Back then, when I first got into them, that album had been released, and the following album was being released. So I got to get into them early on. Now, Schleckbach, this album goes all the way back to 2002. Well, in black metal, that's not really that old. That's pretty new. But for me, this is one of the albums that got me into black metal. And the reason why I really enjoy this album is, in comparison to their current albums are a little bit more technical and heavy, a little bit more extreme. But this album, especially the acoustics in it, it has this like medieval folky atmosphere, but it's not quite like folk black metal in a sense, like old Mangarm and like Vindir and stuff like that, where it's kind of folky. This is a little different. You can hear that influence, but it's still really dark. So this album really got me into black metal, and it's just a fantastic album. Next on the list at number 4, this is Crimson Moonlight with The Covenant Progress. Now this album was another album that really got me into black metal early on, and once again, this is a Swedish black metal band, and you can kind of hear it in the sound. You can hear the influences of like Dark Funeral, Ethereal, but there's the atmosphere in it. Now before this, the band was more symphonic, kind of reminiscent of old Dimmu Borgir, but this album is where they got darker and heavier. And interestingly enough, after this album, they kind of dropped the atmospheric aspects of their music and focused more on brutality and technicality. And so this album in particular is my favorite because it's that kind of combination. It's technical and heavy. It's very riff-oriented. And that's always been my thing. I guess I'm just kind of I'm a guitar guy, I guess. I really like the riffing. And so this is a unique blend of kind of the Swedish melodies, but it also has really heavy driving riffs. Almost like a death metal influence, so to speak, in some of the riffs. There's even a part in Path of Pain at the very end. It's just chuggy and just like, there's a lot of double bass, and it just has it kind of breaks it down into this heavy outro. It's just, you don't usually hear stuff like that in black metal, but this band kind of, diverses their repertoire as far as experiments in their sound. So that album, absolutely fantastic. And like I said, I got into it. That was one of my earlier black metal albums. So, plugging along to number 3. Now, in my humble opinion, this is one of the most underrated bands in all of black metal, and one of the most underrated albums in all of black metal. And this is The Legion with Unseen to Creation. Now, once again, this is a Swedish band, and just like Crimson Moonlight, they kind of experiment with their sound. Some could describe them as a kind of a black and death metal. I think at their core, when you really listen to their music and the focus on the atmosphere in their songs, especially tracks like On Swift Wings and Rise of the Fallen, you can hear the atmosphere in the songs and with the keyboard parts, etc. And it's really an epic sound. And the fact that the focus is on that, I would still put them in the black metal category first and foremost. So this album in particular, their vocalist Anders, he has, unlike the future vocalist, his shrieks are so unique. His higher pitched screams, they're so incredibly unique. It's just different than what many of the vocalists were doing back then. And this is an early 2000s album, and it's just the heaviness of the album. One thing to link them is Emil, their drummer, had been in Marduk for a time. So kind of that era with World Funeral, what's it called? What's the album after that? Well, I can't remember off of the top. You know what? I'm going to go look real quick because I have it on my shelf. There we go. I got it. Plague Angel. So Plague Angel was his last full album. He was on the next album. I think it's Romans 5:12. That's on the shelf too. I can't remember the exact verse. They use it from they take a verse from the Bible. But anyway, he was on a couple of tracks for that. But Plague Angel is his final full length album. But anywho, so he was in Marduk for a time, but he was in the Legion, and so. This album, like I said, the atmosphere, the technicality, the brutality, and also the atmosphere all just combined. It is such an amazing album in black metal, and I really wish folks would check this band out, because to me, it's one of my, it's one of my favorite black metal albums of all time. So check it out, The Legion. Now, number 2. What could be at number 2? Well, I think I mentioned at the very beginning that I'm much more into the symphonic black metal style. So, needless to say, it shouldn't come as a surprise that this is one of my favorite albums of all time. And this is Emperor with Anthems to the Welkin at Dusk. This is number 2. The technicality, the symphonic nature of the band, just absolutely fantastic. Historically speaking, everyone knows how much this album, historically speaking, the significance of it. It could prove that black metal could be technical, but also atmospheric and dark at the same time. So the tracks are absolutely amazing from start to finish. So it should come as no surprise that this is my number 2. Now, at number 1, this also should not be much of a surprise. Once again, Emperor, but within the Nightside Eclipse. Now, I know some folks, they'll have that discussion, what is their favorite Emperor album? And a lot of folks go between Anthems and Nightside. I personally prefer Nightside, solely because of the atmosphere of the album. It is a little bit darker, and it's not just the darkness of it, I don't know how to describe it, the majestic nature of this album. And just the tracks themselves, from start to finish, it is such an epic album. It should come as no surprise when Emperor did some of their reunion shows and are still doing them. The first time I saw Emperor for the reunion in 2006, half of this album was played live, because, probably more than half, because, so many of these tracks are just such epic hits. My personal favorite, I know, a lot of folks think of I Am the Black Wizards or Inua Satana, but I personally really enjoy The Majesty of the Night Sky. That's my favorite Emperor track on this album. It's absolutely majestic. You can almost hear, if they had a full orchestra or something, how majestic the whole album would be. But still with the riffs of the guitars, compared to other symphonic black metal bands, the focus on the guitar work, it's just absolutely amazing with the melodies, the riffs, etc. Just an absolutely amazing album. And so that's it. Those are my top black metal albums, my top 10. Thank you for viewing. Stay safe out there. And hey, take this time out to listen to some good music. And if you're bored, make your own videos. It's all good. Stay safe out there and take care. Till next time.